Good morning, good afternoon, good evening all, it's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, A Box With No Lid. A channel I'm creating not just to bring the awareness around the reality trauma and complex trauma creates, and adoption trauma and removal trauma, but I also want to bring what I've learned through my own personal experiences and my many, many years as an advocate and as a practitioner. Now, yes, this is the next video in the adoption series, and I'm still carrying forward in explaining around the reality that is created when you remove a child to be placed in a non-biological family to be raised. The developmental components of disrupting the natural way an infant learns to engage with their environment before observing it, and forcing that cognitive parts of the brain to come online early to be able to answer the questions of why, what happened, and what do I need to do to be part of, to fit in. Who are these people? What do they need of me? What do I need to do to be safe? This whole process that is a direct result when you remove a child, an infant, especially at birth, in those pre-verbal years. To get this understanding in the relational sense is what this video is about. I've spent the last video sort of, bringing it down to specific points for a specific type of person that has come from these experiences. Because there are those that can brush this off. There are those that move past it. There are those who adoptions, as I said in the previous video, if your adoption was touchy-feely and close and all of that, you would have healed and learned these skill sets and moved past this point. But as I also said, so many adoptions fail. So many adoptions don't have that closeness. There's just a process of this gray area of cohabitation that this process doesn't heal. And when you're looking at relationships, what we look for are very narrow, specific points of connection, where somebody who hasn't gone through this, their language of connection is a lot broader. And I want to take it down again, even into a little bit more detail, to explain these narrower points of connection. Now, when you look at the majority of those that have a failed adoption, where there isn't a real deep emotional connection to the family that raised you, you are left with this void of connection. You have to understand the betrayal of your mother not coming in to pick you up and take you home. You have to process that, but that void is still there. And when that void is not appeased by the family you were raised in, it's a deficit, it's a vacuum, and it feeds our points of connection in our interactions with friends, relationships, and romantic relationships. And this is what I want to explain in a little bit more detail, as some of these little nuances contained within this process. When we look, so our language of connection is very narrow, very pure, very innocent, and very powerfully strong and very deep. And it's misunderstood by those who have not gone through those experiences, and it can very easily be taken advantage of. But when you enter into a relationship, and if those points don't match up, all those points get dismissed, whether consciously or non-consciously, by the other party, it devastates and puts the person who's gone through those adoption removal experiences into this same cycle of rejection. Even if they remain in that relationship, it becomes this gray, the same gray that we were conditioned growing up. Now, what creates these points, these narrow points of connection, and the disappointment that revolves around so much of it, is you just simply have to look at everything in the world of adoption when you remove a child in placement. The success of that adoption comes down to that first single moment when that infant or child is picked up. What feelings those adults that are picking up that infant to raise, what are their expectations, what are their requirements, and are they met when they pick that child up? In a lot of instances, if a complete stranger picks an infant up, that infant 9 times out of 10 is going to wail and cry. that's a rejection. And that's why the majority of adoptions become this grey cohabitation, for want of a better analogy, experience, because the adoptive family had those emotions. It's got this infant, this child is going to fix. I need to fulfill the void of not having children, or I want to, make a difference in the world, blah, blah, whatever it is. Comes down to that moment is not appeased, and it creates a separation. That child becomes a reminder of that moment. That physical, emotional, and neurological reality shapes the scaffold of attachment for that infant. The world that infant has to learn to assess, to find a way of being part of sufficient to survive. Sufficient enough to keep going. Part of the reasons I believe SIDS and similar exist is the kid just goes, there's no place for me, and they let go, and they give up, and they go. They pass. So we have to find a reason to connect, to survive, to keep going, especially in those early formative months. And that's conditioned around a scaffold of there's nothing I can do to fill this void, so I create a sustainable process, an avatar, the fog, to explain and justify my existence, to observe rather than participate my existence within this non-biological family, within this placement or adoption family. That is the scaffold of the framework of connection and attachment that infant creates. And that goes growing upon in complexity as we do when we mature and grow older. But it's still there. And every time we go into a more heightened emotional connection, that scaffold of how we assess, that scaffold of what we need, we have the hope of, am I going to move past that point and finally belong and finally have something with me and be part of something, finally to be able to connect and feel that deep sense of love and connection and so forth and so forth. And when that's not understood or it's not met, it goes to the other track, the avatar track, the fog track, the survival state track. That same cohabitation, that same process of doing everything that's required to make it as viable as possible. But this remains unfulfilled. And that's the nuance that I want understood as, something. One of the larger aspects of this video and the last one is for practitioners as well to understand, is in relationship counseling. When a couple, if you've got one couple that's an adoptee or somebody that's gone through removal, foster care and so forth, and one who hasn't, this needs to be understood in the process of the negotiations, because the language needs to be understood of the language of connection and the misinterpretations behind it. When you come from a place of being raised by non-biological family, you have a different connection language. You have a different scaffolded structure and a way of viewing and assessing connection. And you also have this emotional need that's not been met since your first breath, driving everything around it. And the reasons why this grey structure is put in place. And then you have somebody that speaks a completely different broad attachment language, growing up in a family that emotionally cannot comprehend what it's like to grow up in a non-biological family where you've bypassed all these steps. And these two languages are so polar opposite that the complexity of explanation makes it very, very difficult to bridge that gap. But purely because words cannot describe emotion and feeling and can't do feeling justice. But if you simply understand the processes and you go, well, now I know why you would respond that way. You take the maliciousness out of it. You're doing this to harm me out of it. And go, okay, you're doing this because that's what your nervous system was taught to do. You're responding this way to my inquisition or what I'm saying or doing because you were taught to do it this way. And then you learn through activities together how to bridge that gap and to learn each other's connection language. Like I said a couple of videos ago, dancing and doing things where you're physically engaged, you're physically learning each other's movements and body and connection whilst physically holding in a non-intimate, non-sexual way. You learn each other's language. You move around through and past this. But it needs to be understood right back at that beginning, the nuances of this and the scaffold and structure of connection and the interpretation language of attachment created what, it's one of the fundamental understandings around what happens when you remove a child at birth or post-birth for placement. That needs to be understood. Because as I said, the main point I want to get through this video is one, the understanding of the emotional complexities. But when we don't respond, when our emotional connection language is not in sync with those we are with, we are not doing it maliciously. We are not doing it deliberately. And it takes a very special kind of understanding and a very special kind of connection to be able to learn that connection language so that we can learn that connection language properly. We haven't done anything to do wrong to create this. This is a consequence of removal. This is a consequence of placement. And it's a price tag of removal and placement, regardless of the justifications and reasons for. I really hope this is understood and valued with the intent that I'm saying it in. And I know it makes a lot of us in the world of adoption very uncomfortable to even look at this in our own relationships. But from the advocacy side, I've known so many adoptees, and I've said it a couple of videos ago, that when they're in the relationship counsel, everything becomes their fault because they're not responding and they're not doing this. But as I said, we are speaking a different attachment and connection language, and that language needs to be understood. Not that you become our languages, we need to evolve and create a language together. I really hope you value and understand this. And I thank you guys for your time. And I really hope that this is valued, because it costs too many relationships unnecessarily, and it costs too many adoptees and those who are removed the chances of being happy and fulfilled. Please be mindful, please be safe, please be respectful, and I'll see you all next time. Hope.